Hey there YouTube. So today I'm going to go ahead and talk with you guys about my 3-month review of this 2018 Hyundai Elantra. Basically, I purchased this car to replace my 2015 Elantra, which was giving me some problems. And so after driving both of them, getting the feel for both of them, I'd have to say that this model is 10 times better than the previous generation. And I always said I liked the previous generation better in terms of its styling. However, after really taking a hard look, I have to say I like this model a lot better for a lot more reasons. For one, the headroom in this one is a lot better. In terms of your taller passengers, you're still going to want to have them right in the front seat, but the taller passengers won't be hitting their heads on the coupe styling doors. Whereas this one, it's a little bit more arched at the top, so it's definitely a little more accessible to the taller folks. On top of that, this car also provides a very smooth ride compared to the previous generation. The suspension on the last one was a little bit rough, and it was very noisy, especially on the model that I had. This one is actually very quiet going over speed bumps. I don't feel it needing to fishtail like I did in the previous model. And on top of that, the suspension on this one is just a lot more, I guess you could say, absorbent versus the previous generation, which felt more like a collision with everything you came into contact with on the road. The gas mileage on this one is also a lot better. In this particular car, I have made it 450 miles before needing to fill up, whereas on the previous car, I was only able to make it around 290 before needing to fill up, and that's actually pretty bad, considering the fact that, you know, both of the tanks are relatively the same size. This one, I think, is about a gallon or two bigger, but still, the efficiency of the last engine was actually pretty bad. At one point, I only got 140 miles to a tank, so there was something wrong with the last one. I also was having some issues with the shifting on the transmission on the last one. It was definitely sometimes shifting a little too hard, and at times it would kind of slip into different gears. Another thing on the last one was that the engine was very throaty. This one, the engine still has a similar pitch, but it's not necessarily as loud. And they've really quieted down the road on this one compared to the previous model, which literally had a lot of road noise. Not as bad as a Honda Accord, but really close. So on the previous generation, it wasn't as quieted down as it is now in this car. This car definitely is a lot better in terms of quietness. The engine especially, the engine, you can barely hear it until you get around to 4,500 RPMs. So that's good. On this car though, I did notice that the resting RPMs in 6th gear are a little higher. That doesn't bother me too much because then it eliminates the need to shift down, and what that does is that ultimately helps you save a little bit of fuel. So although now I'm doing 2,500 RPMs at 75 instead of 2,200, it eliminates that need to shift down into gear 5 because now I'm getting closer to the higher RPMs, and if I were driving really fast, I'd be more in the torque band. Also too, this car offers more in terms of amenities. I do have Apple CarPlay. I'm not currently plugged in, so it's going to use my Bluetooth. But on top of that, the screen is a little bit bigger. The radios are now made by Hyundai versus before they used a third party. So the warranty on the radios was always a little bit less. And on this one, if I didn't purchase the extended one, the warranty on this one would go 5 years, 60,000 miles. Also too, this car has different drive modes compared to the previous generation. The previous generation had a mode button on the steering wheel, which would just allow the steering to change from comfort, normal, and sport mode. Now, the sport mode didn't really do much in terms of changing the steering heaviness because, if anything, the steering was already artificially heavy, so you really didn't notice it too much. In comfort mode, sure, it made it a little bit lighter, but my thing is that I don't understand why you wouldn't just leave it in normal. You don't want a steering that's too light because then you're going to spin yourself out. In terms of drive modes, like I said, you have comfort, you have sport. This one does not offer that, but it offers something a little bit better. I will sacrifice the steering for this one because I definitely am fond of the sport and eco mode in this car versus the previous generation. In the previous generation, you had an eco button that you were able to push next to the steering wheel, and what this did was it changed the transmission's gearing a little bit to actually shift faster, and it also changed it to shift a little bit earlier, but it wasn't as noticeable. Basically, it just reduced the throttle response. In this car, however, I noticed that the eco mode reduces it a little too much, and I'll actually do that considering now I'm coming to a red light. So when I put it in eco mode, the car is going to try to stay in the top gears as long as possible. It's basically trying to keep those RPMs down. Now, it's not a bad idea to do, but the problem with that is that when you're accelerating, you're going to lose that extra throttle response that you would if you just had it in normal mode. My father noticed this in his Hyundai Accent as well, and he actually only uses eco mode like on long trips, which is understandable. But for me, I used to use it all the time in my previous Elantra, but in this one I don't use it that much, just because to me it's too much of a lug. So when we actually get there, the light's about to turn green, I will put in the same throttle that I put in originally, and you guys will see that the car is going to definitely accelerate a little bit more slowly. So right off the bat, it really is trying to give me some resistance on that throttle, and it's really trying to shift into gears really fast. So I'm already in 4th gear, okay, going into gear 5. The acceleration's not horrible, but my thing is that it's trying to shift so early that, let's say I needed to give it any oomph, automatically going to downshift and upshift again, and then downshift. Well, I'm going a little faster now, so it's not going to do it too much. But basically, if I'm driving at those speeds between 35 and 45, the transmission's going to start gear hunting. Now, what I do like about sport mode is, instead of just changing the steering, it actually changes the gearing on the transmission, and it makes it a lot more responsive. The throttle is ready to go, the transmission is like, I'm ready to downshift, and the engine's kind of a little bit more peppy. So something to be aware of. But the thing about sport mode is as you can see, well, you can't, but my foot is completely off the gas. It is not in top gear. So it's definitely going to use those lower gears as long as possible to try to give you a more fun ride. Let's go into regular mode. And we have now used the top gear. So as you guys can see though, the engine is not noisy whatsoever. It's only when you get up to 4,000, 5,000 RPMs is when you start to hear it. But really, it's very nice. It's very smooth running compared to the previous generation. And the previous generation, it's a lot more efficient. I actually really like this car over the previous model. Even though I do like the styling and the gauges of the previous one, this one definitely beats it out in all aspects. So it's amazing to see what one generation of cars can do and how quickly your interpretation or your I'm trying to think of the word, your perception of a car can change very quickly. Because I was not considering buying another Elantra, but what ended up happening was with the huge rebate, a huge amount on my trade-in, I was like, I can't really pass this up because I kind of know something's wrong with the car. So basically with this one, it's a lot better. I do like the fact that it tells me my instant miles per gallon as well as my average, whereas the previous one only told me my average. And I also like that I do have a digital speedometer. And I also like that I have 2 trip computers, so on and so forth. So as you can see, my digital speedometer there. I really don't use that one that often because I have an analog already, and if I can't read that, I'm in trouble. Just like people who can't read analog clocks. And if you can't, then I'm sorry, you didn't learn well. But yeah, this car definitely is just a lot better. Even though the engines are not that powerful, it just feels very, it almost drives kind of luxurious compared to the previous generation. So that's something to keep in mind. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go because I'm just about to get home and I'm going to set up my Xbox. So I will catch you guys later. Have a good one.